Today is going to be our 22nd Barichara updates call. And I think many of you know that I renamed this call Barichara and Beyond, because I realized that to talk about what we're doing in Colombia, at this point, we really have to contextualize it in the rest of the world, because we're very actively creating learning exchanges from one place to another. And so a lot of our focus right now, at least for Penny and I, and Benji too, who's been kind of fundamental to this part of the work, is how we can weave and activate other bioregions while things do continue happening here in Barichara. But one thing to say about this time of year in Barichara is when you have a town whose official slogan is the most beautiful town in Colombia, you can imagine how many tourists from Colombia are about to land right on the street where I live, how loud and crazy it's going to be for the next month, as we have an average of 20,000 tourists on any given day in our town of 7,000 people for about a month, starting more or less December 20th until about January 15th. So Barichara just becomes a giant tourist trash can and party place where there'll be loud, salsa music until 5 o'clock in the morning, people setting off fireworks at all kinds of hours, scaring the dogs and literally killing the birds with the concussions that they get from the explosions. And it's mostly going to be a party place for the rich people of Colombia, because that's how the world rolls today. And so during this time, there's really not a lot to say about what's going on in Barichara that we haven't already talked about. But what I think is going to be really exciting to talk about today is how we are creating landscape partnerships in plural, in multiple landscapes, and in multiple directions. And so what I want to talk about today is that I want to share the adventure that Penny and I were just on. So, as I was joking and some of you heard, today's session is sort of going to be like a holiday slideshow to see the pictures from our vacation, where we're going to be explaining what we've been doing in Colorado and Utah and what is upcoming as we're starting to move to a continental scale with our upcoming visit to Toronto, an open invitation to come to Vancouver Island, new invitations that have emerged in the last few days to go to places like southwestern part of England and to Mexico. And there's just more and more. We have a fairly well-articulated invitation to come to Taos and Santa Fe. Bennett, who's here with us on the call, was actually drove up to Carbondale to join us over the weekend. And so what I want to be able to share today is what happened, first of all, so this is like context for the slide deck I'm about to share, is I want to share what happened to my eyes during the 3 years that I've been doing this work in Barichara. Now, when I arrive in a new landscape, how do I see landscapes differently? And how can I start to see what is possible to do with landscapes? And as we go deeply into two kinds of activities, one of them is seeking spiritual connection with land. So part of today's presentation will be sharing where the time when Penny and I went to southern Utah to form a deep connection to the land there. And for those of you who don't know, whatever the category is for most beautiful places on earth, southern Utah is in that list. There are just no places more beautiful than southern Utah. There probably are other places as beautiful, but it's just a very, very special part of the earth for reasons that you'll see in the photos that I'm going to share. And then we're going to go into what happened during our time last weekend doing landscape activation work in Carbondale and Paonia. And then we're going to broaden that into the work we're preparing to do in the higher latitudes of North America as we're about to go to Canada. And we want to give you the sense, the feeling of how all of this is happening. And I think the most powerful tool that I have in doing this is to try to show you the world through my eyes. Because, as an Earth system scientist who's traveled all over the world before and now formed deep relationships to landscape regeneration, I show up differently. And so after the slideshow, if Penny or Benji or Bennett would like to share some of their experiences of last weekend, I want to invite them to share from their eyes but for the sake of the presentation part, at least it'll all be told from my eyes. And that means you'll see more pictures of Penny than you will pictures of me when we're in the landscapes. So with that said, I want to go ahead and get started and just jump right in. And so the key thing that we're going to talk about today in our Barichara updates number 22 is the story of landscape partnerships. And I'm going to start with a couple of slides that I prepared for the workshop I gave on Sunday in Paonia, where I was asked to tell the story of how Barichara created its own landscape vision. Because, you know, in the language of the Common Land Foundation, to create integrated landscape management, we have to form landscape partnerships. And in this picture, which was taken during one of our community design workshops in Barichara, where we're designing the territorial foundation, all the people in this picture are members of our landscape partnership, including that little 7-year-old boy, Alun, who has been leading the way and helping the adults see that we need to restore the Barichara River. He's the son of Felipe, who's there behind him. And so as we gathered in Barichara to learn how to operate as a landscape, we've gained lots of insights and knowledge that we're now able to bring to other landscapes. And so on Sunday, I was very sick and contagious. So we drove all the way to Paonia and then stayed locked in a bedroom of someone's house while 35 people gathered in a physical place in town about a mile away to attend a workshop where I gave slides on Zoom because I didn't want to make everyone sick. And so these are some of the slides that I shared to begin today's presentation. And the first thing I want to say is that in Barichara, the way that we formed our landscape partnership began by planting the seeds of trust. And some of you know this story and some of you don't. But basically what happened is this. I did crowdfunding to raise $50,000 to buy a strategic piece of land, Origen del Agua. And we had about $15,000 extra that wasn't used for the land purchase. And we were able to use that money to weave together a group of people who became the beginnings of a landscape partnership. And we planted the seeds of trust in this way. And it basically worked like this, that I identified 15 existing local projects and invited representatives who were the leaders of those projects. I said, here's 30 million Colombian pesos, which is about $8,000. And I would like all of you to figure out the best way to use this money in service to the regeneration of the territory. And this all began in March of 2021, about a year and a half ago. And as we took the basic trust that I had with these 15 people and helped them form trust relationships with each other, using the money as an anchor for decision-making, a powerful opportunity to do something together, we started to create the evolution of a core team, which continues to this day 2 years later. So it's been, almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years in March that this particular process has been going. And we've learned a lot in the last almost 2 years, the last roughly 20 months, to figure out how to create these landscape teams. And the way that it worked in a simple schematic form was that we created a Barichara Regeneration Fund. We gathered the leaders, people who already had a track record of success with existing projects. We had them reveal their personal agendas. Why did they join this group? What do they want to see this money do? As a way of creating transparency and trust. Then we created criteria and priorities for how to spend the money. And then we set up a process to disperse funds. And as all of this was happening, a landscape partnership began to form. And then, this is a really busy slide. All I want to stress is that the story is actually much more complicated. That my family arrived in November of 2019. We started actively participating in the Bioparque Moncora, learned about lots of other projects. It was during that time that Earth Regenerators was born, and we started to form relationships with people all over the world. And then this work of raising money, forming the Barichara Regeneration Fund, ultimately supporting 15 projects and weaving them together, and beginning a slow, long, deep process of creating a territorial foundation. All of this was happening, and we've been learning how to do landscape scale work. And then, of course, we raised the money for Las Albercas, have been designing the Barichara Ecoversity. We raised funding to support 2 learning centers, one in the transformation of local food systems, another one in syntropic agroforestry. And again, all of this work of catalyzing existing projects, weaving them together, creating new projects, and forming territorial scale governance, learning a huge amount while we're doing it, is what enabled us to come back to other landscapes. And so this kind of activity led by leaders in Barichara, like Gabriela, Felipe, and Tanya, who are pictured here, it's the learnings from all of these people, supported by money from the outside, that has created a mutual exchange. People in other landscapes have been learning from and benefiting from what we're doing in Barichara, including with these Barichara update calls, where we now have, this will be 22, which means we have more than 25 hours of recorded material in the last 6 months, documenting a lot of what we're doing for others to learn from. And we've now been practicing for a little over a month how to bring these learnings to other landscapes. So how does this kind of learning, what we've been doing in Barichara, how does it flow between bioregions? What does that look like? Some of you have already been exploring this in bioregional catalysts with excuse me, with Benji for over a year, and really in a focused way in the last month, as he's been hosting bi-weekly exploratory sessions in preparation for a lot of the activities that happened last weekend in Colorado. So we've been holding these parallel spaces of learning to figure out how to do all of this. And so the way that the story begins for me is as I flew from Barichara to arrive in Denver, and I flew across the United States, my eyes were looking down at North America. And I saw landscapes like this. It was a little foggy the day that this picture was taken, but this is a picture taken from the airplane somewhere close to Dallas in Texas. And what I want you to notice is that there's a river there. That river is mostly dry, and then there's completely degraded land all around it. There's agricultural land for monoculture crops, destroying their topsoils, draining their aquifers, and they already destroyed their native ecology more than 100 years ago. So when I fly across North America, I just see death and destruction everywhere because the continent has been so thoroughly decimated. It's been absolutely destroyed. And this is a typical landscape for most of North America. And then here, this is closer to Denver. This is what is called a green solution, in quotes. This is where the completely destroyed Great Plains grasslands ecosystem, completely destroyed, completely denuded, filled with monoculture agriculture. And then they take machine wind turbines and they try and turn the landscape into a giant battery. It's like the extreme dystopia of a cyborg future, killing and destroying an entire continent and then turning it into a battery to produce electricity for dying cities that have almost nothing to do with sustainability. So as I fly across these landscapes, I no longer see wind turbines as a green solution. Instead, what I see is someone hooking up life supports to a corpse. Someone is taking basically a dead landscape and trying to squeeze the last little bits of life out of it. And so I look at the world so differently now that I've done deep regenerative work, that my stomach turns when I see wind turbines on a dead landscape. I don't see this as a green solution at all. And this just tells you something about how deep the decolonization work is going to be for most of us as we participate in regenerative work. But then I get there and Penny and I pack up our bags to go take Amtrak. Amtrak is this amazing thing. It's like an attempt to remember what Europe does well, because almost all of our rail systems and public transit systems in North America were destroyed in the 1950s by the largest class action suit in history up to that point, when the auto manufacturers, the oil companies, and the tire manufacturers set up a holding company, bought up almost all of the rail systems in North America, dismantled and destroyed them, and then set up the Eisenhower interstate highway system and began forming car-centric suburbs, further killing and destroying landscapes across North America. But there are still a few vestiges of railways left, and one of them is the California Zephyr, which is this incredible train route on Amtrak that goes from Chicago, Illinois, over to Emeryville in California, which is close to Oakland and just outside of San Francisco. And what I now believe to be the best section of railway in North America is the railway we took between Denver and Grand Rapids. Because, well, first of all, Penny and I were really happy on the train. You can't really tell here, but you might notice that it's dark out the windows because we're inside of a tunnel called Moffat Tunnel when this picture's taken, because part of the train route goes under the Rockies, but part of it goes over them. And as we're going up the mountain, we are getting a tour of bioregionalism. Here we are looking at part of one of the rivers. This is actually near the town of Rollinsville. This is the open plains of the ecological corridor of Rollinsville, which is one of the bioregions we're helping to activate, led by the work of Alex Corin. And as we're taking the train through this landscape, we're watching the rivers and watching the mountains and getting a feel for how all of these landscapes work. And there's this super cool viewing car, which is where Penny and I spent all of our time. And Penny really was that happy being on the train. So it's just a nice little glimpse of Penny on the road. And that's when we were able to enter into the headwaters, the source waters of the Colorado River. This is part of the Colorado River when it's still really small and frozen and covered in ice, way up high in the Rockies, going down the western slopes. This is a little glimpse into the water that should find its way all the way to the Sea of Cortez in Baja California, but has been mostly destroyed by competition over water between places like Arizona, New Mexico, and California. But these headwaters, which are so precious, start up in the mountains of the Central Rockies. And as we follow the train, and the train follows the Colorado River, other rivers and streams join it, and it gets larger. And we're starting to get a feel for the personality of this river that is actually many different landscapes. And so as we went down, we started to see the transition from the Colorado Rockies and the Colorado River as it flowed out into the plains and eventually becomes the desert of Utah and New Mexico. And so Penny and I spent 3 days, 3 very powerful days, visiting desert landscapes in Utah. What you can see in the distance in this picture is called Capitol Reef. And for those who don't know, a reef is basically just a word for an impassable barrier. Those rocks that are really hard to get across run 150 miles north to south as a giant wrinkle in the skin of the earth. And Capitol Reef is a national park that holds this incredible history of the earth. So what I want to share with you in the next few slides is how Penny and I were connecting deeply to landscapes to receive information that then we could carry from the earth to other landscapes. So we went to places like Cohab Canyon, this beautiful, incredible canyon that cuts across part of Capitol Reef. And what you can see in this image is that over the span of tens of millions of years, the earth has recorded the history of the movements of water and the movements of rocks. And if you know how to listen and you learn how to read the landscape, this land is filled with stories of ancient earth history, telling us how water and gravity, together with plate tectonics, shapes almost all of what we know as life on Earth. And so as we went into these ancient landscapes like this one, that we were connecting to hundreds of millions of years of Earth history. And we would come to view things like this. This is one of the head rocks of the Capitol Reef system, looking at it from the side. So it's west on the left and east on the right, and there's a highway going through. And this is part of the impassable, uncrossable barrier of rocks that is a wrinkle in the Earth's skin. And I just want you to feel the immensity of it, to feel the size of this Earth story. Because one thing that happened to Penny and me while we were in Utah was we connected to the Earth as a being. So we could feel these movements and changes and really get a sense of perspective for both how small humans are in the grand scheme of things, and also how important we just might be for the future of the Earth. For us to do this, we had to go away from the rest of the humans and commune directly with Earth. And places like this are very, very powerful. You can just feel the presence and intensity of the Earth, how easily the Earth with a big earthquake could just destroy humans, how powerful water is if there's just enough time, in this case, 100 million years, to be able to create these massive structures that tell us who is the Earth and what is our home and where do we belong. And so Penny and I spent 3 days. The first day was in Capitol Reef, where we would hike into these landscapes and feel into the messages that we would gain. Look for insights into who we are as people who are trying to activate bioregions and what we can learn from these landscapes to bring to other places. Then on the second day, we went to another very powerful place called Natural Bridges National Monument, which is part of an incredible system of canyons. What you see here is the world's largest natural bridge. And all of the rock you see is sandstone from ancient petrified sand dunes that took tens of millions of years to accumulate the sand from an ancient ocean. And then they became petrified and turned into rocks. And then they've taken tens of millions of years to erode away into a channel of canyons for 1 million acres, for 500,000 hectares of land. This canyon system is as large as the entire bioregion of Barichara. And it's just a network of canyons that looks like this. And in a place so powerful and so ancient, we were able to perform rituals and connect to the land. And so I brought tobacco from Barichara, which tobacco comes from the northern Andes. It is the basis, it is the sacred plant for the peace pipe and a lot of peace processes for Native Americans in North America. And I came to this place where there's at least 9,000 years of history for the Anasazi and Hopi people. And also that is a place with millions of years of earth history. And as I performed the ritual of smoking tobacco on the full moon, underneath the world's largest natural bridge, I received deep messages about what the earth is and where all life comes from. I had a spiritual transformation while I was there. And my spiritual transformation was connected to the life energy of the universe that created planets, gravity, and water. And then eventually as water bombarded our planet in the form of comets to eventually make an ocean and eventually create a hydrosphere, or the circulation of the hydrological cycle for the planet, that I could sit in a place like this and feel the deep connection to ask, what does it mean for a planet to be alive? And it was from that place that I saw something very special about being human, which is that humans are probably the only animal to ever evolve on this planet that is capable of knowing, feeling, experiencing, and telling this story of deep time. The story for how stars and planets form, the story for how life begins on a planet, the story for how to sustain life on a planet. And this creates this blend of profound humility and profound fragility. I felt how precious humans are, as we may well go extinct in the next 100 years, sitting with the awareness that I could feel deep time as a part of the earth, and I can have love and reverence for the earth in a way that probably no other part of the earth can. It's something that's unique to humans. And this is a message that I brought back with me for the work that Penny and I are now doing. And as Penny and I went to these different places in the land and felt these deep spiritual connections, we prepared ourselves to arrive in Carbondale and Paonia to help activate and further develop landscape partnerships. But before we could do that, Penny wanted to take me to one of her sacred places, which is a place in Canyonlands called Needles. And one of the things that you see as you enter Needles is this amazing structure. This is called Newspaper Rock, where there are several thousand years worth of pictograms. And this is a place where you can see the history and relationships between humans. If I remember correctly, all of these pictograms were drawn during a long span of about 2,000 years. So they're different ages depending on which drawing, but they were all drawn over the span of 2,000 years. So this gives us a feeling for the deep relationship of humans to landscapes, where they had similar symbols, worldviews, and languages over the span of several thousand years connected to the same landscapes, while these landscapes were forming on timescales of of tens to hundreds of millions of years. And we could feel our place in time by connecting to this history. And then we hiked into Needles. And Needles is a network of petrified sand dunes that are either red or white sand, creating very unique structures. And Needles is a place for solitude and nature connection. We hiked 8 miles on a perfect winter day. It was about 40 degrees Fahrenheit with blue skies, so we could just wear a light jacket and hike and not get too hot and not get too cold. And as we hiked into this landscape, we found ourselves being very silent and feeling a deep connection with ourselves and the confidence we have that I know who I am and Penny knows who she is, because this is a sacred place to go into the landscape by yourself and discover who you are. This is a spiritual place that indigenous people have gone to for rites of passage for literally thousands of years. And also you can see after the snow that came the day before and it melted and it pooled up with water, you can see the active process of erosion as water is shaping and changing this ancient landscape on a daily basis. So while this may look like an ancient landscape, it's also our contemporary. And because it changes so slowly, if humans survive in 5,000 years or 1,000,000 years, this landscape will still look very much the same as it does now. It will continue changing, but so slowly that we can come back to it as a place of remembering. And this ability to know where are the sacred landscapes, to be able to have deep time connection, is part of how we find our way through planetary collapse. So just for the record, the indigenous people of the central Colorado Rockies, called the Ute people, their sacred sites were in southern Utah, and they would come to these same landscapes. So when we go to Carbondale and Paonia a few days later, actually the day after this trip is when we went to Carbondale, we were going from the sacred sites of the Ute people to their summer home up in the headwaters of the Colorado River and the different river systems of the Central Rockies. What Penny and I realized during these 3 days of travel is that we are both becoming speakers for the earth and ambassadors to the future. By feeling this connection with deep time, we are learning how to activate and transform landscapes today so that they can become the landscapes of tomorrow with a perspective of deep time that speaks directly from the earth. And this spiritual message that we gained had a profound effect emotionally on the way that I would give talks and workshops, the way that we would hold space for dialogue with the different communities, the way that we co-create with Benji in the work of hosting all of these dialogues, and the way that I do my work and all of us do our work here in Barichara. Then we arrived in Glenwood Springs, which is where the train drops us off, and Benji picked us up. And I got a rare photograph of this precious animal, which is Benji while hosting a bioregional catalyst call. He was hanging out in a coffee shop in Glenwood Springs, hosting one of the exploratory sessions. And while he's having this call, Penny and I show up and we sit next to him and we listen to him having the call as we have a hot cocoa and I got a latte and we just sat there hanging out. And it was so special to know that Benji, who grew up in these landscapes of Western Colorado, would come and meet us and join us on the journey. Then we get to Carbondale and lo and behold, Bennett had arrived. Hi, Bennett. He was so excited. You can just see the look on his face. This is at a place called 3rd Street Center, which is where we held the talks and workshops. On the Friday night, I gave a talk to about 20 people. And then Saturday morning, we had a half-day workshop with about 35 or 40 people, both in Carbondale, where we talked about pro-social groups, landscape partnerships, planetary collapse, and Earth regeneration. And we established a relationship with Bennett that now we're all friends. We don't just see each other on Zoom. We've hung out and hugged so that when we do finally come to Taos in New Mexico, we're going to be able to build on this relationship that we created last weekend, because Bennett drove something like 6 or 7 hours to come and see us. Part of our journey into Carbondale was to see the amazing Mount Sopris. This mountain is considered by most of the people in the landscape of Carbondale in the Roaring Fork Valley. They see this as the most sacred and important being in their whole landscape. There are ancient stories about this mountain. There are books and songs written about this mountain. It is definitely the point of focus for spiritual work in doing landscape connection and nature connection for the Roaring Fork Valley. So I wanted you to see Mount Sopris, one of the most powerful beings of the Western Rockies. And we had these workshops where we broke into groups and we explored different topics and we shared learnings. I actually did a fly-through with a Google Earth presentation of the work we're doing in Barichara. And we brought the learnings from Common Land Foundation and the landscapes they work with. And then all of these local people shared what they've been doing in the Roaring Fork Valley, taking in the learnings and the inspiration from us and their new connections with the people across the mountain pass in Paonia. And that's what caused us to see patterns like this. That if you look, this is the drainage basins for all of the river systems that feed into the Colorado River. What we started to see was that the Gunnison River, which you can see there in the middle on the right, Gunnison is the river system that comes out of Paonia. And there, just between the Gunnison River and the Colorado River, is a tributary of the Gunnison River, which is the Roaring Fork River, which connects Paonia and Carbondale. And the Colorado River, which is a little bit further north, comes down the western slopes, and the Gunnison River joins it a little bit further west. And the place where the Colorado River and the Green River come together, that is in Canyonlands, where the Needles area is, where Penny and I had our nature connection. And then the Colorado River keeps moving down, and we get down into the Verde River and the Little Colorado River in New Mexico, and you end up going across the Grand Canyon into Arizona, through part of California, and into Baja California and Mexico. The reason I show you this is that as we were connecting to the lands of Utah, and then going back into the mountains to visit Paonia and Carbondale, Penny and I could deeply feel, and actually Benji could too, because he spent a lot of time in the desert of Utah. We could all feel this profound connection for the entire Colorado River Basin. We could see that by starting at the headwaters, the source of life and energy for the entire southwestern part of North America, that we could actually do things like invite, or rather Paonia and Carbondale could invite a Colorado watershed summit and gather people as representatives of bioregions up and down all of these rivers connected to the Colorado Basin, all the way down to Mexico. And what you can see in this image is that the rivers have already organized the land, and the humans, in this case, the Ute people, the Hopi and the Anasazi, and other ancestors of these landscapes, moved up and down these rivers. The Ute people were semi-nomadic. During the summer, they'd go up into the mountains of the Gunnison, the San Juan, and the Colorado. And in the winters, when it was too cold, they would go down to the Green River, the Little Colorado, and the Verde River, and they would migrate. And because the Ute people mastered the use of horses that they got from the Spanish when they came, they were able to do this more quickly in their final years. And they still do this to some extent on the reservation land that they were pushed to in Utah. But what we could feel was that by being speakers for the earth, we could begin to not only connect one landscape to another, but form tapestries of landscapes that move to the continental scale. And so as we began preparing, we're still beginning to prepare to go to Toronto at the end of January, where Brian and Susan have invited us, I just went online and looked at the ancient Algonquin Lake, which was the last time that there was a huge water system that connected 3 of the Great Lakes and about maybe 5,000 or 6,000 smaller lakes in Ontario that were all filled because all of the Great Lakes were 65 feet higher. They were pooling water from the melting ice sheets. And this is basically the geography of the Great Lakes area about 14,000 years ago. And what you can see is that Michigan, Illinois, New York, Pennsylvania, Ontario, they're all connected by this massive water system. And so Penny and I started thinking and feeling into this continental scale. And so we're learning to think and feel like a continent. See, if you look at the Great Lakes in this image, basically there are 2 smaller Great Lakes off to the right, and then there are 4 of them that are up there larger, connected together. All 4 of those Great Lakes were part of Lake Algonquin. And the bottom of the biggest, lowest one on the left, which is Lake Michigan, The bottom of that one is Chicago, which I'm flying to Chicago with Elise on Monday, and Penny's flying on Tuesday. And we're going to go right to the edge of Lake Michigan to visit some of the amazing museums of Chicago. And what that means is we're going to be visiting this territorial connection between bioregions across the Great Lakes in the northern Chicago, northern Illinois area. And actually the place we're staying, which is the home of Jessica's family, is in Lake County, Illinois. And we're staying in the town of Crystal Lake, where there's still a network of lakes similar to the ones up in Ontario. And so what I want to emphasize here is that the connection of all these people in the Great Lakes is in a language family, the language of Algonquin. So Algonquin is a name given to a tribe, but it's also the name given to a language family that includes lots of different tribes. And so when you look at the Iroquois Nation, when you look at the, was it the Haudenosaunee and other groups like this, they are all speakers of Algonquin languages. And they were connected as bioregional trade networks across the Great Lakes region. And then when you look over here to the desert Southwest with its deserts and its canyons, you'll see the Rocky Mountains, and you'll see another connection across the continent. We are starting to learn how to think and feel at this continental scale. So our goal with this new capacity to think and feel like a continent is to activate 100 bioregions in the next year. We're currently at 8. We've received about half a dozen other invitations. So soon we'll be at 14. And we can feel like getting to 100 will happen quickly when people figure out what we're doing. And so we're doing this by being supported on Patreon. So if anyone would like to support us on Patreon, just a quick little plug. Penny and I are going to pay our travel expenses to give free talks and workshops all over the world with Patreon support. So I just wanted to share that. Patreon.com/m/bioregion, bioregional_activators. But you can ask us for the link if you wanted to join. We receive about $1,300 a month in support right now, and we've estimated we need about $4,000 a month for the next year to cover all of our travel. But I just want to share that with you because what we're starting to do now is, as human beings, we are becoming voices and storytellers of bioregions and continents. And it's working. It's absolutely working. And so what I want to do right now is just ask, is there anything that maybe, Penny, is there anything you would like to share before we pass to others? Because I'd love to just invite any perspectives you have from the storytelling and our experience. Penny, would you like to share? And then Benji, I'd love to invite you to share after.
Oh gosh. What will I share? I feel like something about the connection to deep time for me in Utah is really significant. It's for me, it's when I first went to Utah on my own and I did my solo trip out there, like what I came to realize was how the earth actually, the reality of what the earth is. And I could see clearly like where the insanity is in humanity and where the beauty is in humanity, both at the same time. And it's that perspective that woke me up. It woke me up to being in service to earth. So just going back there, being there with Joe, it's so special and reminds me why we're doing this. So I think I wanted to share that, and sort of in the work with the bioregional activators aspect, what's amazing to me is the emergent aspect of this and the organic nature of how this is starting to energize people. Seeing like somebody in Carbondale get excited about us going to Toronto and connecting us with somebody in Toronto who's doing this amazing project, and then that person connects us with the next somebody else in another bioregion, and just how quickly and fast this can all be energized through just living in the emergence of it, living in the emergence and allowing the resources that are there to arise in the moment, and being adaptable and working with that. So yeah, it's a beautiful alive process. One other thing just about the desert for me is the canyonlands are where I feel the most alive. I feel that a sense of aliveness in my core. And that's really been my guide. It's really my guide to know where the life is, like, and to focus my energies there. When I feel that aliveness, I know I'm going in the right direction. So, yeah.
Thank you, Penny. Benji, would you like to share?
Okay, sorry. Had a brief challenge with the mute button. Yeah, I'm not somebody that gets FOMO very often, but boy, I was a little jealous of their trip to the southern Utah deserts. And I guess I just want to, there's a couple things I want to share. One is just echoing the powerful orientation that those lands can give you, and the connection to deep time, and how that puts so much in perspective. It's wild. I mean, I've had some of my greatest lessons in my life just hiking around canyon lands and needles, and it's amazing what you can sense into there. And so, yeah, I encourage everybody to spend time with rocks, basically, more of it. And the only other thing that I'd like to share is we've been having this conversation a lot about organizing ourselves based on the landscape, and it came up again yesterday in the bioregional catalyst conversation. And as I've been exploring this topic with different people, I think I've come to realize just how abstracted so many of us are in the way that we see the world, where we live in just such conceptual spaces. And I think it's really hard to relate to the bioregional vision. I think sometimes we understand it ironically in a conceptual manner. And the more that we really defer our sense making, our carrying of complexity to the landscape, the more we're going to be able to embody all of this and understand experientially what bioregionalism is. And so, and I think that insight goes really, really deep. I find that the more that I think about it and the more I talk about it with people, the more layers to that I uncover. So I just wanted to share that. Yeah, how do we continually defer to the landscape as we form landscape partnerships and develop shared understandings as communities? I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Benji. Bennett, are you still here, Bennett? There you are. Would you like to share something from your experience?
Yeah, sure. Y'all make it look easy. This incredibly delicate process of holding such a degree of complexity in the understanding of, this whole scenario, but still allowing space for that emergence of what wants to come through without interfering. It's just being in the room there in Carbondale and just physically, being present to that process. It was really like, wow, this is some next level stuff. You could jump in and be like, here's what we need to do, but that like restraint, that like delicate balance necessary to just let the group come to its own conclusions and forge their own way ahead is such an integral process. And yeah, the bit that Benji spoke to about letting the land hold the complexity. I mean, nature is the ultimate in that. We will never match nature's ability to hold complexity. So might as well take a load off our shoulders if she's willing, which she always is. So yeah, I just felt very blessed to be witness to that and gain a more embodied awareness of just how special this gift that y'all have is. So thank you.
Thanks, Bennett. I can feel New Mexico calling. I felt it even more because of Toronto. It's like this interesting way that going to another part of the continent caused me to feel the juxtaposition of like, wow, the desert Southwest is organized differently than this kind of Great Lakes area. And where I am in the Northern Andes, again, very different. Even though it's erosion, gravity, plate tectonics, like there's some really deep things that are the same. So I'd love to just open up for any questions or comments that anyone may have. Just raise your hand and I'll call on. Is there any questions or comments? Gail, please.
Yeah, you were talking when the chat got busy. Nicaragua is calling, Joe. I got the message from Laura Kim. They want to talk to you. So she's going to send an email later with everyone's email addresses. They speak Spanish. Some people speak English, but I'm very excited about connecting you and expanding your work down in Latin America. So just wanted to let you know.
Sí, por favor, y muchas gracias. Thank you. And one thing about that is that for those of you who've never been to Central America, if you go anywhere between basically Mexico and Panama, you will feel the earth connecting continents. There's so much volcanic activity. It's so powerful. So just, yeah, it's a big deal. Stephen, on to you.
Gosh, it's frequently the case, so much to say. I was on the Benji's call yesterday, which was really good for me because so many things seem like they've been, in hindsight at least, they're obvious. Oh yeah, I've thought of that a dozen times, but then sometime along the way it clicks. So some things clicked yesterday, like letting the land hold the complexity, or letting the natural world hold the complexity. And I've known that, if we're talking about living in concepts, I've known that conceptually, got more in touch with that while I was in Barichara, and then coming back to Colorado and giving my housemate basically 2 months notice that I'm moving out, and not knowing what's happening on February 1st. Really not pointed towards Colombia again, but I have no idea. And watching my mind try to figure that all out, and then soothing it and saying, you don't have to hold it. Take care of what's right in front of me right now. And my landscape is blurred behind me because after I got here, I just completely exploded all over my living space. And I'm like, well, can I relate to that? Why am I separating this from the natural world? Made by man. Ooh, man made it. It's not the natural world. So this kind of makes me think of that, like landscapes, the landscapes we make as humans even. Yeah, that's kind of my journey while I see what's next and bring the pieces together. So thanks. It was great to hear your storytelling again, Joe.
Trust the earth shall guide us every step of the way. On to you, Claire.
Yeah, I guess I also want to riff off of all of that that's coming up about letting the land be the teacher, the leader in what we need to do. But just an observation from having been part of the conversations happening essentially in Earth Regenerators in this space. And just acknowledgement to Benji, just having held that space so well. And but noticing my own growth, and just so the experience, so this is the embodied experience of the shift in me over that period of time, and my ability to see in a way that I was not able to see before. And I heard you talking about that too, Joe, and just how much it's not that I didn't know that going in, but I'm just reminded over and over that collective intelligence and is what it's like coming together. That's what's unlocking the potential of our ability to navigate our way through the landscape and or through the land. And yeah, I just wanted to just say that. So
Thank you, Claire. On to you, Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Joe, Penny, and Benji. That was beautiful. And yeah, you've been inspiring me in the UK here, and just listening to the land and what the land is asking. And about a week or so ago, I was running through some ancient woodlands near me, place I'd love to go to, and a spiritual place for me. And I was wondering that, what would the land say to me? And I just noticed this big flash of white. It just really caught my attention. I was like, what is that? And I just had to go and have a look. And there's farmland all around. And the farmer had been plowing the field, and all of the chalk had come to the surface, which I've got a piece of here. And for me, the chalk was speaking to me. That's, chalk is incredibly rare. In the south of England, we have about 80% of the world's chalk streams that are, unique in the life that flourishes there, and and they are the source of our water. So that was speaking to me and inspired by all that you're doing. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Richard. It makes me think of how Charles Darwin was mentored by Charles Lyell, who is credited as being the creator of geology as a science, because of those unique rock formations in England. And so there's something very important about the history of science. The first time that someone with a scientific orientation of data analysis, hypothesis, those ways of thinking, to look at places where the earth was turned sideways and exposed was on the coast of England. And that's what sent Charles Darwin off looking into the world as a geologist. And without that geologic time, he couldn't see the changes in species. It just still took him 25 or 30 years to see. But without deep time, without what is called gradualism as a philosophical framework in paleontology and geology, which is the idea that things change slowly over time, that small changes accumulate as a way of changing the species, he wouldn't have been able to create the foundations of modern biology. So there's like the depths of the secrets of nature they feel endless in a way. There's so much. So I'd love to just ask if there are any other questions or comments, or if I should make a closing comment, what is preferred. Nidhi, please.
I feel called through Richard's comments and your comments, Joe, to name a very sacred place in England, which is the White Horse of Uffington. It's a horse. There are many white horses in England on the chalk lands. This particular one is remarkable. Some associate it with the ancient tribe that worshipped the horse goddess Epona, the Celtic horse goddess Epona. What is quite remarkable about this particular white horse is that it could have been created in a 21st century graphic design studio. It is so modern in design as well as ancient. And it's also remarkable in that it can only be fully seen from the air. And what does that mean in terms of the people who carved that horse? It's a very, very powerful spot on the planet. And I owe it a great deal, that land. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Nidhi. John, on to you.
Yes, thank you so much for your presentation, Joe. And I just want to pipe in. I feel I love it that you had a 7-year-old as one of your teachers. And I'm 73 going on 7, and I'm falling back in love with the earth. And, I love the Utah desert. I'm from Minnesota and Ontario. I love that area. I'm falling more deeply in love with that. And here in Colorado, the last 10 years of my life have been about that. And my meditation as I walk, as I breathe, is deep time, deep beauty as I meditate. And so I feel just so like the earth, she speaks to me if I have the heart to listen. And my ears are open, and I don't know. I mean, I've felt called for this group for a long time. I got the book. just retired. I have connections with different lands in Montana, in here in Colorado, that may be part of a one of those 100 that you're talking about, bioregions. And so, yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and just want to say, with my tribe of lovers of the earth and 7-year-olds, that spark that we all have, if we remember what that's like to be in love with the earth at 7. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Something I wanted to share is that a question that always, intellectually really intrigued me is, there are two versions. One version is, what does it mean for something to be alive? And there's this whole philosophical realm of discussion and debate, because it turns out the boundary of what's alive and what's not alive is really porous, and in a very good way. It's like, is a virus alive? Because viruses can't replicate themselves. They have to hijack the RNA of another organism to produce their own DNA. And so if DNA replication was a requirement, viruses wouldn't qualify. So you end up with these really interesting boundaries. And then a particular version of this, which my daughter asked me like 2 weeks ago, Daddy, are rocks alive? And something that was so obvious to me at Natural Bridges, all that sandstone. Do you know what sandstone is? It's the bodies of shellfish. Basically, we accumulate so much sedimentation in the world ocean from the living earth that calcium carbonate creates a lubricant. As you have a subduction zone where you have a continental plate going down into the magma, it brings calcium carbonate into the magma. And that changes the speed of plate tectonics. And while it's really difficult to know for sure, there's sort of accumulating evidence that it's probably the case. So this is not a confirmed finding, but it's one of those things that they're closer to seeing, is that plate tectonics may have shut down on the Earth if we didn't have life on it, because of this lubricating process of calcium carbonate. And then you add to that without the tidal forces of the moon, this gravitational pull constantly tearing at the Earth's crust, plate tectonics probably would have shut down. And plate tectonics is essential for life. A living planet has plate tectonics. And so this is part of the Gaia hypothesis. Did life create the conditions for a living planet? Super interesting stuff. But what became obvious to me when I learned about this part of the cycling of calcium carbonate and limestone was like how much rocks are actually fossils. They're ground up bodies of living beings. They're ground up bones and seashells. And that entire 1 million acre canyon maze that has Natural Bridges in it is the accumulation of ground up bodies of seashells for tens of millions of years in an ancient ocean. And just to see that like rocks are alive in that they're the bodies of ancestors. But are they alive now? Well, they may be dead now in a chemical sense. And that's what's so fascinating, is they could be dead and alive. Introduce Schrodinger and his cat. But this is where these interesting philosophical debates, it's not to figure out which one is right. It's to sit in reverence to how beautifully vague it is. Are rocks alive or not? It's like, well, this rock was alive 100 million years ago. Is it alive now? No, but would you say that my bones, fossilized bones, are alive? Well, actually, all of the minerals of my bones get replaced by rocks to become fossils. So again, you see like how there's this transformation, this alchemy. But what I realized really profoundly last week when we were in Utah was, at first, it doesn't matter if we agree that rocks are alive or not. Because what definitely is alive is this cycling carbon cycle of the Earth, which creates all these rocks. That is alive. The entire biosphere of the Earth is a subset of the carbon cycle, which includes the formation of all the rocks, which includes the deep mantle and the Earth's core, through these dynamic relationships. And what I came to realize last week is just how profoundly my training in Earth system science was spiritual training. And I knew it was spiritual. There was a way that I would like see the earth from space with satellites and be moved by it, but it's just like that rabbit hole doesn't end. Here I am 20 years later. I started studying Earth system science in 2001. And the more subtlety I know, the more I visit landscapes and see these living processes, the more I feel the living earth. And that's what we're doing. You know, when we're doing this landscape activation, is we're inviting humans into this deep relationship of earth life. And earth life, the planet, is plate tectonics, it's volcanoes, it's oceans, it's sedimentation, it's erosion, all of these, what's called geomorphology, which is the study of how the earth creates shapes on land. Geomorphology is the study of life. And so that's what's so powerful about the way that we are activating bioregions. Like I can already feel the Salish Sea calling when Claire says, come to Cowichan Valley. Like I'm coming to Cowichan Valley to feel the Salish Sea. You know, like just like when I go to Toronto, I'm going to feel the boreal forest and the Great Lakes, and that they're not separate. And so this is the gift that we receive by living this way. This is the thing that the indigenous people could often feel, but there was a level to which they couldn't. And this is something that comes from cognitive linguistics. If you don't have an experience of something together with a concept for it, together with the experience again after you have the concept, you don't have the granularity of experience to experience it. So what we're doing by understanding plate tectonics, which was proposed in 1920, widely discredited and only accepted again in the 1970s. So it's only been a conceptual lens for 100 years and an increasingly clarified one for 50 years. The indigenous people did not have plate tectonics. And so to combine indigenous wisdom practices with something like plate tectonics allows us to have indigenous wisdom for the whole planet. And that is what is new. And this is what we're doing, is we're creating this. This is the third world that the Kogis talked about. The first world was the ancestral indigenous practices. The second world was the world of modernity and science and industry and all these things. And the third world is bringing together the best of both, because both are going away. They're both going away. The indigenous worldview has been going away with 500 years of colonialism and 8,000 years of empires, but it's going away. And we have to salvage the best of it. And I gotta say, as a scientist, my capacity to experience the mystical and the spiritual through science is unquestioned. It's unquestioned. I know that there is a proper way of bringing science to spirituality. It exists, and we need these best parts of science to survive. Because one thing I saw in the western slopes of Colorado is the snowpack is going away. And also those source waters, they put up dams, they dig tunnels. Denver claims the source waters of the Colorado River that used to go to Baja California. They dug a fucking tunnel and they piped that water to the dead Front Range that they already killed to kill the source waters of the Colorado River and the entire Southwest. So where Bennett is in New Mexico is being affected by the stealing of the source waters. By the way, there's a doctor in Carbondale who wrote this book. It was given to me. I'm going to recommend to everyone. Circulating Source Waters by Charles Evans. I'm almost done reading it. This book is amazing because he talks about how all living beings are just the circulation of source water. And the source water is the water that creates all of our rivers. And it's a spiritual training guide for teenagers. That's what this book is. But like John said, we're all becoming 7-year-olds again. We can all become teenagers again. But if I if I was to ask, why would I go to Taos in New Mexico? Well, it's because the source waters of the Colorado River are being destroyed in Paonia and in Carbondale because the people there are stealing it and taking it to Denver. Not the people of Paonia and Carbondale, but the people in a broader sense. And so we need the people who protect the source waters to go up and down the rivers. And this is something that's very common in the Andes. For example, the Kogi people walk every river that is part of their sacred land of the Sierra Nevada, which includes a 2,000-mile walk to the headwaters of Rio Magdalena, which is right by the border of Ecuador. It's like the people of New Orleans walking to Montana to get to the headwaters of the Missouri River, which is the furthest point of the Mississippi Basin. Right? Like, they would walk that. They do it about once every 10 years. They send their mamos, they walk up and down the rivers, and once every 10 years, they walk to San Agustin, Colombia, which is the headwaters where there's this Paramo, this very powerful, unique ecosystem, which is really close to Ecuador. And so, and now when you start looking at the Incas and the others further south, they connected to these source water relationships up and down the Andes. The people of Chile and Peru did the same thing with the people of the Northern Andes. And you can see it when you go to New Mexico or Arizona or Colorado. The people of North America did it too. And if we can find the remnants of the ancient peoples of Europe, they would have done it too. They were just destroyed 4,000 years ago. So it's harder to find. It's archaeologists who find those sites because they've been so thoroughly destroyed. And so it's just recognizing that the work we're doing is recovering these ancient patterns. Claire, please.
I just feel like I want to put this in there. I remember going to a talk by, I guess it was part of an indigenous and legal team that were down in South America and Ecuador, and I'm feeling like it was part of Brazil, and I actually can't remember which indigenous groups it were because they were covering quite a bit. But one of the big pieces that they won in terms of negotiating with like the oil companies and extractive mine companies that would go and destroy part of the watershed, and was that instead of any compensation being discussed in boardrooms on maps about where the destruction had occurred, that the people making the decisions had to come and meet the community at the river and walk part of the river in order to even enter into any negotiation. And I thought, like, it was just such a revelation that, and it was so transformative to the people who were making decisions, because they couldn't make the same decisions once they were engaged in an embodied way on the site of where the destruction had occurred.
Yeah, thank you for that, because one thing that I felt about the train ride Penny and I did was once we came over the Rockies and we started watching the Colorado River grow. And, you know, I've hiked to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, which is the Colorado River. I've been in some of these places that are fairly distant from that, like 1,000 miles away. But when I started to feel like, you know, what would be amazing is imagine a 10-year moving school that is the Colorado River School, where children go to the headwaters, the different diverse headwaters, and go all the way to Mexico. And everyone in the landscape, because you know, that's what we're doing right now. The Pasos de Agua program in Barichara is happening. We're in day 3 right now, where the kids are learning to walk the Barichara River's what's called quebrada, which is the drainage of the basin, because the children are going to inspire a curriculum for restoring the watershed of Barichara. But just imagine if the children of the Colorado Basin walked the Colorado Basin, and the kids of Mexico were brought to Colorado, and the kids of Colorado were brought to New Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. And they just walked the damn thing. You know, Felipe, my friend Felipe here in Barichara, had this activity. He called it Caminatas del Agua, water walks. The kids would walk the land and ask the adults what happened to the water. And that's what inspired Pasos de Agua, which is just the steps of water. See, these names are not accidental. And that's the summer camp that Elise is in right now, is Pasos de Agua. It's happening this week. So for the Barichara River, we're talking about a drainage of 30,000 hectares. You know, you could walk from one end to the other in a day. It's maybe like 5 or 6 miles. There might be a longer part that's 10. So with little kids, you might do it in 3 or 4 days. But for the Colorado River, talking 1,000 miles. And that's just horizontal distance along the main Colorado River. Once you add all the other major rivers, it might be 5,000 miles. I don't know what it is. But you can imagine, they don't have to walk the whole thing. But imagine a bus full of kids going to the headwaters of each river and driving down the river and stopping at key points and interviewing people about what they're doing. By the way, I'm totally convinced the kids are going to lead the way in all this stuff. Not just because my daughter is a great teacher, but I've seen the power of kids. So I just want to add that to show you how simple it is to imagine bringing kids up and down a river. Show the logistics of legalities and all that stuff and money come into play, but there's a sheer elegance. Take a group of kids and walk up and down the Colorado River. No, the whole thing, the whole damn thing. To take kids in Colombia and say, walk the whole Rio Magdalena would change Colombia, would change their future for kids to walk the Magdalena River, which, by the way, the Magdalena River received more than half of the bodies of the people who were murdered during the time of violence. They dumped the bodies into the rivers. So you can just imagine what walking the rivers would mean in Colombia. So, just naming the power of all of this. Stephen, on to you.
So this is all the perfect example of the land holding the complexity. It's like the Claire gave the perfect thing. It's like people had to walk the land. You didn't have to sit down and think about it. You didn't have to draw diagrams and plot futures out. Like they walked the land and they were altered by it because the complexity communicated in ways that we can't with our language. And I'm not one to give simple answers or stick with them, but the answer to the question, how do we ... walk the land, walk the rivers.
Yep.
Get people on the land, get the decision makers on the land. Even if it doesn't appear that policy changes, the more we can get people on the land and in their bodies in any way. So every little group that's doing something like that is so important to nurture, whether they're ready for bioregional activation or whether they're still in their real formative stages.
Thank you for that, Stephen. I just want to name that the most powerful part of the land, Origen del Agua, for me personally, was the walk among the Camino Real that goes to Origen del Agua. And when I noticed how many people would come that didn't want to do the walk, it was like a check mark. Are you spiritual about this work or not? I don't want to walk. Okay, you're not spiritual. I do want to walk. Okay, you're spiritual. It was that clear. Because it's like an hour and 15 minutes. If you're out of shape, it might take longer, but it's not very far. It's like walking 3 miles to get to Origen del Agua from Barichara. And it's a beautiful walk. And I was like, people cannot understand the land, Origen del Agua, this little 3-hectare nature reserve. They can't understand it unless they walk the ridgeline. That is the aquifer system from Barichara to the land. And Las Albercas, there's a loop that you can walk in about 3 hours to walk around the entire basin of the river that we're going to bring back to life on Las Albercas. So in a morning, you can walk it. And I would be like, if someone says, I don't want to walk it, could we drive there? Could we take a tuk-tuk? I'm like, you can, but you miss the point. The point is that by walking the land, you feel its connections. And if you walk the land enough times, you will act in service to those connections. And while someone can be instructed, dig a water retention system here, put in a contour swale, plant this tree, here's how to plant a tree correctly, all of that's good to know. But if you want to be able to do that without someone telling you where to do it, you have to walk the land. Because walking the land, you'll feel all of the connections. And you won't even realize you're learning them. It's subconscious, it's gestalt. A lot of my ecological training was mushroom foraging. What I learned was where the mycelia spread themselves, which is a hugely important part of ecology. And I got to eat a lot of, chanterelles and porcinis, but that was another thing. I was strongly motivated to learn ecology. But his name, it was all walking. I did a lot of walking in the Olympics and the Cascades when I lived in Seattle, because we were collecting mushrooms on weekends. And so I just want to bring today to a close by saying that On Monday, I'm taking Elise and we're going to Chicago. Penny's meeting us there. And then we're going to spend a week in the Chicago area and a week in Missouri visiting my family. And I'm going to bring this way of seeing landscapes. Like already in Missouri, which is the cave state, we're going to go and visit a couple of caves. Penny is curious about the caves. I'm sure Elise is going to like them. Missouri has absolutely amazing caves. And when we're in Illinois, I'm going to be feeling the Great Lakes. How could I not? When I'm doing this work, it's like the door is open now. You know, the breeze can touch my skin. There's no barrier any longer. And what I want to encourage for all of us is to practice feeling the earth in this way. And what we're finding is that creating learning exchanges between landscapes is a mutual activation. It speeds up the process profoundly. So look what we did in 3 years in Barichara. If we get good at this, we'll see the same outcomes in a year in another landscape. You know, you go at the speed of trust, so we don't want to try and rush it. We have to go at the speed that actually works. But looking at Paonia and Carbondale mutually activating themselves. And you can already feel how this mutual activation is happening in Santa Fe, because both times someone from Santa Fe came and interacted. Different people, but the connection was there. And the person in Carbondale who connected us to someone in Toronto was Rita. So Rita, this woman who started bringing us to Carbondale, she's originally from Ontario, but she's lived in Carbondale for almost 50 years. She has a picture of Lake Algonquin on the wall in her bedroom where Penny and I slept when we stayed in her house last week. And she connected us to a group that for the last 15 years has been restoring the largest lake in Ontario that's not one of the Great Lakes, which is called Lake Simcoe. And they've raised millions of dollars and organized thousands of activities with hundreds of local groups. And we're going to meet them when we go to Toronto. So just to give you a sense of how much the earth is organizing our humans right now. And we're just going to follow the threads of invitations to wherever we need to go. Penny and I are going to be exhausted by all this travel. But we feel like there's 1 year to do this. It needs to happen in the next year because of planetary scale processes. The window of opportunity will close off. We need enough depth of human relationships for this to work. We need depth and diversity of human relationships. And we hold the complexity in landscapes. And sadly, I don't see anyone else doing exactly what we're doing. But I see enough people doing something that's really close to what we're doing that I think they're going to figure out that they're doing something similar pretty soon. It might be another 3 or 4 months of us doing this, and then we'll easily get to 100 bioregions in a year. It doesn't mean Penny and I personally go to all of them, but we'll probably go to 20 or 30 of them. You know, we might do 2 or 3 per month. So we might get to 50. We don't know yet. We're making this up as we go. Yeah, Claire, we're gonna all talk. I just was sick and traveling. We're excited. So I want to close today by saying today's call was definitely on the and beyond part of Barichara and beyond. But what I hope you can really sense is that none of this would have been possible without the work we've done in Barichara. It's not possible now. You know, Bennett was in the room, you saw it. When I took people through the Google Earth fly-through of 17 projects in Barichara, everyone's eyes were like, holy shit, we could do this too. It was so important that I created that map. It was so important that I showed them, you know, we're actually doing this in Colombia. And so that will become true for your landscapes too. Someone will depend on you outside of your own bioregion. Someone's going to need what you have to share. Like I could already imagine the people in the Salish Sea who have done some better reclamation work with the indigenous people than the people in Colorado, which is sort of ironic because it's so difficult everywhere. But maybe it's even better still around Lake Algonquin in Ontario. We don't know yet. But there are a lot of great indigenous relationships in the Northern Andes. So you can already see that these ways of, like, I know that indigenous reclamation is going to be a huge part of all this work. It's going to be different in each place and similar in each place. So things like this are just going to continue coming up. How do we create exchanges from one bioregion to another? And so that's all I want to say for now. And just close by saying it is my intention to do a Barichara and Beyond call next week as well, while we're in Crystal Lake, Illinois. And I'm really feeling grateful to get to be here for a few days right now. I arrived last night, I leave on Monday. My main reason for coming back to Barichara was to pick up Elise and take her on some of these journeys. I'm in a really deep exploration with Jessica about how to educate Elise, with Penny and I traveling all over the world, and whether Jessica's okay with us traveling with Elise or not. And we're trying to figure all that out. I think what we're doing could be great for kids. But we're still, you know, it's a big change. So there are a lot of variables involved. But increasingly, it'll be impossible to do this without all of you. Because what's going to happen is all of us will be sharing with all the people we know, and this will grow so big so quick that people won't be able to remember who did what, which is a good thing. You know, we get to a place where it doesn't matter who gets credit. For the moment, to say Penny and Joe are doing this, invite them, or Benji's doing this, work with him, is going to help us get to where we can get to that self-sustaining place. But then after a few months, we'll be getting credit for things we didn't do, just part of how it all works. But I just want to say this big thing is happening. It's just going to get bigger. I'm imagining by 6 months from now, we'll be working with about 50 bioregions. Just because how could we not with this kind of work? It feels pretty inevitable to me. Even though I have no idea specifically each step how it's going to go. I fully trust the process. So thank you for joining us for this. You can reach out to any of us who you've seen involved in different pieces. If you want to preemptively create relationships with other landscapes, you guys are seeing who they are amongst each other as they're forming. So you can reach out directly to each other. If Penny and I are going to arrive, we're finding that it's more powerful if neighboring bioregions are activated at the same time and get them into relationships with each other. We can already sense that with the Great Lakes. So I'm sure we could see that with the Salish Sea and Cascadia, which is really a federation of bioregions. So, and I'm sure in Southern England, there'll be a lot of that too. So that's all for now. Thank you, everyone. I'll share the recording. That's another thing, is if you would share the recordings of these Barichara updates with other people, let them know what's going on. Right now, the Barichara updates get an average of like 20 or to 30 views when I post them because people don't know what they are. And so I think the most powerful way for word to get out about what we're doing is for us to just tell our friends in appropriate ways. Benji, is there something you want to say in closing?
Yeah, I'd love to just share with this group, because I think there's a few people in here that I don't interact with regularly, but in the bioregional callus we're doing, we're hosting sessions on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and then we're going to do campfires more regularly on Sundays, and just trying to explore how we can create spaces for sustained support and connectivity, and where we're exploring, you know, what does it mean for us to form a network of bioregions and learn together. And I'm right now, I'm drawing so much inspiration and direction and guidance from Joe and the experiences that we're having on the ground. But I want to just invite more and more the collective intelligence of this group. If you guys see what I'm doing, if you've got feedback for me, if you've just feeling some instinct or intuition that you'd like to share, I'm all ears. I'm trying to be as adaptable as possible. This is in no way, shape, or form about me. This is about us. This is about this network. And so I just wanted to put the invitation out there for this to be co-created to some extent. Please let me know if you have any ideas. That's it. And
along those lines, Benji has a Patreon account. Benny, can you find his link? We need to be supporting him. He's getting like $131 a month for the work he does. And we need to figure out how he gets supported in this work. Not Penny and I need to cover our travel expenses for what we're doing. We need to get Benji covered for him to keep doing this in a sustained way. So I just really wanted to plug that what we're figuring out is how to do all of this with decentralized finance. And we're actually trying to create pools of money for the bioregions themselves. And we're bootstrapping all of it. So you see the link there in the chat. I'm just going to pimp the hell out of it. Please go support Benji. A lot of us here know and love his work. We know how valuable it is, but that's not why you're doing it. It's because you love him. So please just do that. I think that would be a really good thing. And with that said, thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week. We'll see you wherever we land. Join Bioregional Catalyst, where Benji's holding these calls. We're going to have Bioregional Catalyst and Barichara updates. So we're like a flow of every day or two. There's some activity you can participate in. And what we envision is that pretty soon, 90% of the work will be in the communities themselves, and only a little bit of it will be online. And we'll be using these to coordinate and move things forward. It's sort of already starting to happen, but we're going to get there really quick. So the Bioregional Catalyst work is going to become it's already a backbone of the work, but it's going to reveal itself to be very important. So with that said, support Benji. You can support Benny and me too, but if you had to choose and you only got $10 per month, give it to Benji.
Oh,
And we're going to make all this stuff happen. And so that's it. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time, and have a beautiful rest of your day.